Hello all. Today we're going to look at a nursery rhyme which I suspect if we all close our eyes we'd see the same image. An egg-shaped anthropomorphic character with short arms and legs. But who or what was Humpty Dumpty? Why do we all think the character is an egg when there's no reference to it in the rhyme? And what does Richard III and an English Civil War canon have to do with this rhyme? And if you wait till the end you'll hear a new theory on the origins of Humpty Dumpty. Just in case you've forgotten the rhyme, it goes as follows. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. The premise of the rhyme is straightforward enough. A chap named Humpty Dumpty is apparently minding his own business, sat on a relatively high wall, oblivious to his own well-being or health and safety standards, apparently. He falls off for reasons which are not explained. However, the impact is such that he's broken beyond repair. Although one interesting side note is that Humpty has some powerful friends. The king spares no expense in trying to put him back together again, but without success. So what are the origins of the rhyme? It first appeared in Samuel Arnold's Juvenile Amusements in 1797, although according to the leading experts on nursery rhymes and a favourite of this channel, Peter and Ione Opie, they say its age is to be measured in thousands of years, or rather, it is so great that it cannot be measured at all. The tune most widely sung today is relatively new in comparison. It's recorded in 1870 in James William Eliot's National Nursery Rhymes and Nursery Songs. It's been argued it's more of a riddle than a rhyme. After all, what couldn't be fixed by all the resources at the disposal of a monarch? Although I'm not quite sure given the option I'd choose horses for the job. In fact, in some 19th century versions, it wasn't men and horses trying to fix the situation. It was 60 men and 60 more, or even better, 40 doctors and 40 wrights. But they still couldn't put Humpty to rights, which is disappointing. Part of the reason it's viewed to be ancient is there are versions of a man falling off a wall all over Europe. In Norway, it's Lil Trill. In Germany, Humpelkin Pumpelkin. In the French version, it's Boule Boule, and my personal favourite, the German Pennsylvania title of Hobbity Bob. But why all the pictures of the egg? It wasn't always this way. Kate Greenaway, one of the most famous authors and artists of children's stories in the 19th century, drew Humpty as a small child, although I suspect children in nurseries all across the country looked at that picture and might have asked why a little boy couldn't be put back together again, leading to an awkward silence. An egg might be better. The reason for the egg is actually quite straightforward. The first reference to Humpty being an egg is in Lewis Carroll's Alice Through the Looking Glass and the drawings of Sir John Tenniel. Lewis Carroll changed how we see Humpty. Alice remarks that Humpty is exactly like an egg, which Humpty finds to be very provoking. But is there a deeper meaning to the rhyme? Its origin might be ancient, but that doesn't stop people more recently trying to explain the meaning. So let's look at the theories. The idea that Humpty couldn't be put back together again by all the king's horses and all the king's men has been seen as a metaphor for the limits on the power of monarchy, and some have linked this directly to the overthrow of specific kings. The most common connection is with Richard III. He seized the throne of England in 1483 during the Wars of the Roses. This period is also linked to the Grand Old Duke of York nursery rhyme, and I've done a video about that. I can add a link to it below. Richard was known to have a deformity, a curvature of the spine, and some have argued he was called a humpback, and this is where we get Humpty from. After 2 very troubled years on the throne, Richard was challenged for the crown of England by a Welshman, Henry Tudor, at the Battle of Bosworth Field in Leicestershire. Richard was killed and his forces were defeated, the last English king to suffer such a fate. So, as the rhyme tells us, neither he nor his reign could be put back together again. There's also the suggestion on a viral TikTok video that Richard's horse at Bosworth was called Wall. So, in an all too neat link to the rhyme, he fell off Wall and was hacked to pieces. There are some issues with quite a bit of this theory. Taking Humpty from humpback is a bit of a stretch. Humpback as a word is not recorded until 1697, over 200 years after Richard's death. Richard wasn't known to be fat or clumsy, so that doesn't work with the 18th century definition of Humpty Dumpty being a clumsy, rotund person. There's also no record of Richard's horse being called Wall. There are some speculations about it being called White Surrey, but even this can't be verified. And finally, while Richard was killed, he wasn't cut to pieces. His exact resting place was lost until his body was discovered under a car park on the site of what had been Greyfriars Priory in Leicester, where he had been taken after the battle. While there was evidence of a violent death, his skeleton was largely intact. He now rests in Leicester Cathedral, and I think on balance we can discount this as the origin of the rhyme. A more widespread explanation for the origin of Humpty Dumpty, at least in the various books and YouTube videos on the real meaning of nursery rhymes, is that Humpty Dumpty was the name given to a cannon used in a siege during the English Civil War, which ran from 1641 to 51. The English Civil War was a series of battles between the forces of King Charles I, defending the status quo, and those in Parliament and their supporters, who sought to reduce the power of the king and later have him overthrown and executed. According to this telling, the events concerning Humpty Dumpty occurred during the siege by parliamentary forces of either Gloucester or Colchester. In the Gloucester version, Humpty Dumpty refers to a tortoise siege engine used to breach the walls in 1643. However, according to contemporary accounts, though the machines were certainly built, they were reportedly captured following the siege and dragged into Gloucester as a trophy, and they were never put into action. So there's little possibility that they suffered a fall and were irreparably damaged. This leaves us with the siege of Colchester as the origin of the rhyme. Again, we have the Royalist forces being attacked by the Roundheads, but this time in 1648. In this telling, Humpty is a cannon mounted on top of the church called St. Mary's at the Wall. Colchester has some very impressive Roman walls. The gun was apparently manned by a local named One-Eyed Thompson. Using Humpty, he was able to repel the attackers until the church tower was hit by enemy fire and the top was blown off, sending Humpty tumbling to the ground. Naturally, all the king's horses and all the king's men tried to put Humpty together again, but in vain. This theory has been enthusiastically taken up by the local tourist board and by Albert Jack, the author, in his book Pop Goes the Weasel, The Secret Origins of Nursery Rhymes. Indeed, Jack goes further and claims to have found 2 verses which precede the famous section of the rhyme. They run as follows. In 1648, when England suffered the pains of state, the Roundheads laid siege to Colchester town, where the king's men still fought for the crown. There One-Eyed Thompson stood on the wall, a gunner of deadliest aim of all. From St. Mary's tower his cannon he fired, Humpty Dumpty was its name. There are a number of problems with this rather ingenious theory. First, Albert Jack says he found the rhyme in a 17th century book, but he's provided no evidence that this book exists, and as other critics have observed, it's not written in the style of a 17th century verse. There is a reason for questioning the existence of these additional verses, which leads us to a more fundamental issue, and that is whether the origin of Humpty Dumpty is in Colchester or Gloucester. The fact is, the story that Humpty Dumpty was a Civil War armament is a complete fabrication. Indeed, I wasn't even sure whether to include it in this video, but it's become so ubiquitous on the internet and YouTube I felt I had to discuss it. The idea that Humpty Dumpty was a cannon came out of the imagination of David Daub, a professor of ancient law at Berkeley University, writing in the Oxford Magazine in 1956. It was designed as a tongue-in-cheek explanation for the rhyme. The fact it's been taken up by books and websites and the Colchester Tourist Board says something about us wanting to believe there is underlying meanings behind these verses. So where does Humpty Dumpty come from? Personally, if I had to guess, I'd go for the following. We know that as early as the 1690s, Humpty Dumpty was a slang name for an alcoholic drink. According to the list of beverages sold in London, the name Humpty Dumpty was given to ale boiled with brandy. It seems to come from a variant of hum, a common name used for strong beer. Perhaps Humpty Dumpty was a drinking song, and if you drank too much really strong beer mixed with brandy, you could very well fall off a wall and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put you back together again. I think we should leave the last words to Humpty himself. In Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, he states in rather scornful tone to Alice, "When I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less," which might be an observation on the meaning of the nursery rhyme or riddle itself. Well, I hope you enjoyed this egg-sighting video. If you did, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. Bye for now.